this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me today on The Conversation is Teresa Lynch, Vice President of Field Operations for Lennar, one of the nation's leading builders of quality homes for all generations. Teresa graduated from Indiana University with a degree in anthropology and political science. I got to talk to her about that one. Before beginning her career at the project management office at Yum Brands. From there, she spent 6.5 years at Sony Entertainment, followed by over a decade at Comcast Xfinity, where she was named Vice President of Xfinity Services. And since 2022, she's been in her current role at Lennar, which is the VP of Field Operations. Teresa is an amazing project manager, a great person, and someone I'm happy to call my friend. Teresa, thanks so much for joining me on The Conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you a question I ask everybody who comes on. I think of all my guests like as superheroes, and every superhero has a backstory, what got you into this. So tell me a little bit about your backstory and, kind of where it got you to where you are today.
It's funny because you hit on it in that intro. It's, I grew up in a family of academics, a lot of archaeologists, anthropologists, people who like to sit and, look and think about different, problems and cultures. And so I thought that was the way to go in college. And at some point in realizing, and I'm sure we'll get to it in some of the other questions, and realizing that probably my path was not to be a professor or writing books, was a little confused on how to turn that into a job that paid the bills. And had a, really great opportunity though with this wonderful, wonderful woman, Ann Byerline, and just talking through, what I wanted to do. And I realized that anthropology, that degree, political science, that's all about looking at cultures and how people come together and hierarchies and how things are done. And then I realized really that's what I wanted out of a job. I wanted to figure out how to get things done in a way that built what we call teams, right? Cultures, teams, it's all kind of the same thing. And so I think it starts there. It starts with an anthropology and political science degree and figuring out what does that mean? What does that mean in what I'll call the real world, the non-academic world, the world where, you have to find a skill to do with that. And I had some great opportunities, and one came up where I got to really kind of think about that role. My first role, Clint, funny, at Yum Brands was, this is going to tell you how old I am, by the way. It was librarian, because it was when the internet became a thing, right? This is back when it became a real thing. But it was exactly that. It was looking at how our presence as a company was really landing on the internet. And it started that, just rolling that point of saying, I love this notion of culture. I love the notion of what it takes to build it, how people over time have built it, and translating that now into what does that mean to projects and the culture that it takes and the teams and building that. And so I think it starts, with me in a little town, youngest of 6 kids, trying to figure out what I was going to do with an anthropology degree that I thought I was getting to make my dad happy. But figuring out that it really is just who I am. Like it's how I build teams. It's how I look at what we do. So.
Well, I'm dating myself then, because I first came to know of you when you were at Yum Brands. So
yes, you did.
I'm clearly just in the same bracket as you are. So.
Yeah.
So I've known you from Yum Brands to Sony Pictures to Xfinity, and now you're at Lennar. Tell us a little bit about what Lennar does and then what your role is.
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, that we're one of the largest home builders in the country. I obviously will tell you the best. I do a lot of work for our connectivity services group. So how do we focus on bringing the best connectivity into these communities that we're building? I have the best job in the world. I think I get to work with our field teams and our construction teams and our homeowners and our property management teams. So all the way down the line. And it gives me, again, that place to build, that place to look at, strategically, how are we implementing things, and how do you get from point A to point B in a way that really creates something for everybody involved, whether it's our construction teams or our homeowners. And we get a lot of support on that from a company like Lennar, where they are completely focused on building homes, right? We don't say houses, we say homes, because that's what it is, and that is a focus for the company.
And when you say connectivity, what do you mean by that?
So, when we think about typically when you're moving into a new community and you're kind of like, hey, who's my provider? How do I get internet? How do I know that I've got the connectivity that I need when I'm here, and it's going to support my family and all of its needs? And we take that seriously. Sometimes it's harder than others to make sure that you can get those providers in there and have them there when our homeowners need them. So we work with a lot of different providers to make sure that we can get them where they need to be for our homeowners, and that we're working to ensure that the service they're bringing is the best service for our homeowners.
Okay. Now, I mentioned a couple of the companies you work for, and so you work clearly very disparate industries and sectors. So I'm just curious, regardless of the specific project, because I imagine a project at Young Brands was different than one at Sony Pictures or Xfinity, or now what you're doing certainly is different at Lennar. What do you believe is some of the key qualities that distinguish a good project manager? If you're looking for one, or what do you think is what good qualities do you look for?
So that's so funny, because I just hired a new project manager, and so I've just gone through this process, again, and as you've said, I've been through it hundreds of times over the years. And there are a couple of things that absolutely never change, right? And one of those is being a dot connector. And for a project to be successful, you need somebody who understands how to listen, and listen for all the piece parts, right? It doesn't matter what meeting you're sitting in. It doesn't matter who's talking. Your job as a project manager is to take each one of those little pieces and figure out how it relates to the work that you are trying to build a team and a project plan to accomplish. And so that dot connection, where I can be sitting with the president and he's talking about a strategy of something that doesn't sound like my project, but it's a strategy of the company. And I can be talking to a field operations person, and they're talking about how hard it is to get something done. A really good project manager can take those two things and say, okay, what does that mean to what we are trying to accomplish as a team and what we are trying to accomplish in this project? So I think that dot connection for me is the number one skill set. And it's one that comes in all, forms, right? People can have such varied backgrounds and be really good dot connectors. I think the other thing is, you have to be pretty fearless. You and I both know sometimes people don't want to see the red, right? They don't want to see the risk log that says red, and you'll have leaders that will try to talk you out of it. You'll have leaders that don't want to tell the bad news. You'll have people who really buy into the whole emperor has no clothes things going on. And so how do you have that fearlessness, leveraging, and I think you get this fearlessness by leveraging and building good plans, right? It's about the data. It's not about the emotion. It's not about, I feel like the sky is falling. It's very clearly tasks 10 through 52 show you, based on how we're calculating this, that the sky in fact might fall. So, hey, why don't we go back and do something about it? So I think for me, those are probably the two things that I like to look for, and make sure that every project manager can bring to the table.
I think that's good, because it's not just sky is falling, but how are we going to fix it so that it doesn't fall? And I think what I like what you said is we're predicting in the future. Tasks 1 through 10 through 52 say the sky is maybe in a trajectory to fall. And so it's not just that it's falling, but we see that it's going to fall down the road. We actually have time to recover from that. I was just talking to somebody about this last week, that in project work, we know that things are going to go wrong. And I'm okay with getting bad news because I expect it. What I'm not okay with is getting bad news that you've known about for months, hoping and praying the miracle would occur and it would just fix itself, because now we have that much less time to resolve it. So bad news is expected. Give it to me as soon as you know.
Exactly. And is this where I get to get on my soapbox about forward planning?
Please.
I'll tell you what, I don't even understand the people that look at me funny when I push in that direction, because it's what you just said. If I'm not forward planning, I am not going to give you that time. I'm not going to give you that time to fix it. And how's that going to work, right? How's it going to work when I come to you and say, well, I thought this thing might not go well, but I couldn't really see it in my plan until today, and it's going to go terribly tomorrow. So what are we going to do about it? Like, that's not what anybody wants to do. And if I can forward plan and I'm looking at every single week, what does that mean? And where is it going? And what's my risk? And what do I have to compress? And what's reasonable? And I think this is where I get excited, right? About thinking about cultures and building project teams, because you have to know your team to know what's reasonable. You have to know what else is going on. This is, I'm going to plug the duration-based planning here because my spiel on that. Like, you have to tell me the amount of time that you have with everything else going on to complete this work so that I know as a manager when it's going to be done. If you give me some % complete, and you know this story better than anybody, right? Like I said, I come from a family of academics. I decided at one point that would be my path, started down the path of a PhD, and I can tell you that I am 78% done with my PhD. And you might look at that and say, oh, good, she'll probably be finished soon, right? 78% out of 100%. That sounds like a good place to be. I've been there since 2001. So for 22 years, I have sat at 78% complete. I do not think that's going to actually help you figure out when I'm going to be done or what that means to your overall plan. So I tell that story because I don't know another effective way for people to understand that duration, that forward-based planning, understanding the risk on day one, right? You plan that project and you already see the risk. Then I can have super intelligent conversations with you as a leader and say, okay, so here's our risk points. What do we want to do? What's reasonable right now? What do we want to watch? What are we okay accepting the risk on, right? That happens. It's not like everybody's going to throw gazillion dollars at fixing things, right? You sometimes just have to look at it and say, that's a risk that we're going to accept, but you do it knowingly and you do it up front. You don't wait until I've pressured you into like, hey, I need to know today before you go home tonight what we're going to do about this thing that could blow up tomorrow. So I think that's, that to me is just such a critical part of good methodology, right? And knowing that you have a team that understands that, so that they can communicate effectively, have that fearlessness, right? I can fearlessly tell you those things. I don't have to be timid or worried or concerned. I can show you on a piece of paper. It's not emotional. It's not, hey, I think. It's not based on last time. It's, look, we have a really clear line of sight to what could or could not happen. And now we can go in and do something about it.
Yeah, I think there's so much to unpack there. It's also the idea that it's proactive versus reactive. So you're proactively forward planning so that we don't have to react at the last second. We have time in the short term and the long term to react to an issue that's going to happen. And everybody knows when you have a problem that's going to be in the future, you have multiple solutions to solve that problem. But if you react like you're saying the day before, the only solution left is to do stupid things, which I've seen, like air freight concrete block to a construction site to solve a problem. And that's not the cheapest way to do it. But it is the fastest way. And that's when you end up throwing money at your problems to get them to go away, or you hit the date with something that doesn't work right? You've cut a corner to get it out the door and it's buggy and you got a flash to fix in later. And it's just not something you can be proud of at night.
Right. Exactly. And it's why I call it a soapbox, because I will stand on it and talk about this all day long. Because I just don't see a better way of doing it. I don't see another way that gives you all of those pieces, right? And so, it's critical.
For somebody who's listening who doesn't know what we're talking about, so obviously you're speaking my language. We go way back, but this might sound like micromanagement when you talk about forward planning. So I certainly have my take on that. What is your take on that? Why is this not micromanagement, what you're explaining?
I think it's funny. I just literally had this conversation with somebody that was kind of pushing back on, oh no, we should just, we should take the end date and we should back into what we need to do here. Right. And so you can imagine my eyeballs bugged out of my head. My hair caught on fire just a little bit. And I think it scared them, right? It scared them when I said, no, we're going to put all these tasks and we're going to put them in order and we're going to understand what it really takes. And then we're going to talk about how to bring them back. And they had that similar reaction, right? Like, that's micromanaging and we've got all these project teams. I'm like, look, the only way, right? I'll use probably a poorly illustrated sports analogy, right? The only way we're going to score. The only way we're going to get that touchdown is if we're all going in on the same play. We all know where we're going. It's not micromanaging when you get the team together 5 times a week, twice a day to talk about what these plays are and knowing when to implement them. It's not micromanaging when I tell you that you need to run a button hook and you need to go there so that we can make sure that this play gets us where we want to go. That's good planning. That's saying, hey, I'm going to look at all the different ways things could happen. And I'm going to make sure that we as a team are all moving in the same direction to get there. If I don't, a few of us may be of like mind. You and I may be like, yeah, I got it. We're going to head that direction. And then half the team's back here waiting for the ball to be thrown over here instead. We're not going anywhere, right? And so I don't think it's micromanaging to have a good plan. I don't think it's micromanaging to put all that planning in up front so that I don't have to be hair on fire, figuring out new plays, wondering what's going to happen, working people till the dead of night in a project. We're burning them out. I don't have to do that because I already have all the things in place to ensure that I don't have to do that. So I try to explain that investment in that forward planning up front pays in culture, in teamwork, in efficiency, in general happiness of your project team at the end in a way that you won't go back once you start doing that.
No. In fact, you'll probably save, your end date will be quicker. You'll finish faster and you'll spend less money because you won't be throwing money at your problems at the end.
Right. Exactly.
And I think another thing is, just to be clear to everybody, when we talk about forward planning, we're not talking about managing or planning things down to the hour. We're not even usually talking about days. We're talking about like a week. Give me things in, 1 and 2 week chunks so that we know that things are going to be done. So it's a balance of not micromanaging, but giving us enough visibility so that people don't hide behind big, long durations, right? And you procrastinate. The other thing I really like what you said is the team focus piece of, you tell me how long you need, right? Because that's, I might be the expert on a certain thing, but if I'm not doing the work, I don't know what that person, I don't mean it. Look, I know you've known you for a long time and I know your skill set, but I don't know what else you got going on in your world right now. I might think that should only take Teresa 3 days, but what I don't know is you have 5 other projects, you're in training course, you're on vacation, you're moving your kids, whatever. There's so many things going on in your world that I can't possibly know about. So the only person who knows how long something was realistically going to take is you. Right,
exactly. And that risk again of assuming that right? Your mom said about assuming.
Yes, exactly.
Right, exactly. It's no different in the project world. Like you wind up with disappointment and frustration, and somebody and many times, especially if you have younger project teams, Clint, this, like they're not going to push back if you tell them how long something should take. They're just not going to get it done. And they're going to have all that stress and all that guilt and all that worry about the fact that they can't get it done. And then you're building bad communication paths. You're just not creating space. And I spend a lot of time, reading and trying to implement from Lencioni's like 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? Like, how do you create that container? And you create that container by building teams and projects where you give space for that. You give space for people to say, hey, I got something else going on. Yes, that's important. Okay. Because what you'll find is, once you've done that a few times, all of a sudden when push comes to shove and they're doing more, how many people only do one job anymore, right? Like that's like no one ever. When push comes to shove and they have to make a decision about which one is more important today, your stuff becomes more important because you gave them the space, because you gave them that support. And so over time, again, the dividend gets paid back. It may seem like more upfront, but it really, really pays in the end.
It does. It leads to accountability and buy-in and commitment on the team's part. So this next question, I'm going to kind of segue into it. I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but one of the reasons that you became, in my mind, I put you on like a pedestal, to be honest with you, when it comes to project work. That's why I've mentioned you in my book and I wrote about you in Forbes.
Don't do that.
So one of the reasons is one of your teammates, somebody on your team told me one time that the reason they loved you is that you would actually tell them, look, I'm not going to give you the deadline. You do the plan. You tell me when you can deliver, and then I'll go fight to make that the deadline. And that just, my heart just bloomed when I heard that, because that's somebody who gets it. That's a person I would die on the hill to try to work for. Right. So with that kind of passion you have for this work, how were you able to grow that? And where did that come from? And how do you gain confidence in your career? What gives you the ability to go out to your boss and go, no, that date is not realistic. We're not going to hit it. Here's what we can do, and be able to fight that.
Yeah. I'm glad somebody said that. I'm glad they know, because I feel like that's my job, right? My job as a leader is fighting for the right thing to do. And I think, again, I have such faith and trust in, that type of project management that I have no problem taking it in and saying, look, like, we did the work. We put the work in. We didn't phone it in. We didn't do some backwards math with our calculator and decide like, yep, we can figure it out so that we can all high five you and hope that we get there. Right. And play the hero. We sat down, we did all the hard work. We talked about all the hard stuff. And this is what it's going to take to be successful for the least amount of money, right? In the timing that makes sense, and not burning out a team of people. And the way we did it gives me that confidence, because I can quickly describe that. I can walk through the risk. I can give them the options of what it takes to pull it in. Hey, if you want to do it earlier, I'm going to need you to hire some more people. The cost is X, Y, or Z. If you want to bring it in earlier, I'm going to need you to take these other 2 projects off the list. They're not going to get done. So when you can do that, you'll find any executive, any C-suite executive, likes having the choice, right? I'm not telling him that's the date and you have to do it. I'm saying, if you want it done well, if you want it done the way that you want it done, that I know you want it done to meet your strategy, here's how we can do it. If you are more worried about these other things, here's what you're going to give up, or here are the trade-offs. That's an easy fight. It's an easy conversation. And my team will tell you, I tell them all the time, you guys make me look really smart. I mean, like, I'm walking in there with all the things I need, right? And at the end of the day, CEO, COO, they get paid to make that tough decision of what trade-off they may or may not want. And I will respect that decision, but I will explain to them all the things they're giving up in that process. And by doing that planning up front, by having those conversations, by having a team that is committed to that and giving them the keys to tell you what that looks like, then when that CEO says, okay, right, you brought me everything. Yep, go do it. I know I'm going to deliver. I didn't walk in there and promise, something I can't do. I didn't overpromise. I'm not going to underdeliver, because this is what we've told them. Now, you and I both know, because I'm sure I've called you railing about it. Sometimes, as my mom would say, these executives will cut off their nose to spite their face. And I grew up in Indiana. It might be an Indiana saying, but,
Nope.
but right. Like, it's,
Yep.
they don't care. They promised somebody without their due diligence. They promised somebody, they promised a board, they promised a street, they promised somebody that, hey, this product's going out by this time. We're going to have this new thing. We're going to have an announcement. And you could buy 1,000 countries, right? For how much money and time and things have been wasted with that. And you look at it and you're like, but we didn't deliver. And look at your customer satisfaction rates going down. And look at people's belief, but look at your brand identity. Like, look at these things falling. And I think if there's something that, we can all do better at, it's actually quantifying some of that, so that we can spend that time afterwards, not saying I told you so, although there are moments, but instead saying, okay, so next time, I know you didn't fully buy into it next time, let's start with the team doing the plan, then let's make the commitment. And so how do you empower that? How do you continue to educate that? And I tell every executive that I've ever worked for, every president, every CEO, everybody I've ever worked, I said, the one thing I need you to do for me to make this work is I need you to ask the questions the right way of your other leaders. I need you to not ask them, hey, when's that project going to be done? I need you to ask them, what does the plan say? Because when you start doing that, then they're going to need my team to do it the right way, to give them the right answer for you. So the more I can get those executives to ask the question in the right way, so that their executives learn to value what the team is bringing in that moment, the more we change the culture around that kind of stuff.
And I think it's the key there is you're bringing them data. It's not your gut that says they're not going to make it. You have it in black and white. And as you know, the critical path is in red. You have it in black and white and red as to why it's not going to make it. And then you can ask questions about, if you think it's 6 months earlier, please tell us how our plan is wrong and we'll go fix it.
Exactly.
But you're asking questions that are not based on gut or hunch. It's based on facts. And here it is. Tell us what's wrong and we'll make it right. Or you have to recognize, leader, that this is when it's going to happen. And if you promise something, we have to figure out what we're going to do. It'll be some shortcut solution that, but I love the fact that it's data driven. It's not just your gut, it's data.
Right. And you can quickly see, lots of times they want to throw resources at it. Like, I'll just more bodies. Like, let's just pour more bodies on it. And I'm probably notoriously famous for saying you can't, 9 women can't have a baby in a month.
Right.
Like sometimes it just doesn't, that's not going to happen. You can put as many people as you want on this project. This is the time it takes to do it right. And so now let's look for another risk mitigation. Like that this is not it. You can't just throw bodies at it. And I think that's, a lesson learned for a lot of people on the receiving end of those projects, right? Where they're just, I've got some extra budget. Like, let's throw the people at it. It's a lot of people standing around staring at something then. So.
Yep. Sometimes it just takes one oven. It's got to bake.
Exactly. That's probably a much better way to say it. Yeah.
No, I like it. It's too many people looking at the oven doesn't make it work any faster. It just takes what it takes, right?
Exactly.
And I do think that I work with a lot of teams and the people on the team will grumble about management being stupid. And I don't think management is typically stupid. They got there for a reason. And I think if you give them, to your point, if you give them the choice of, hey, here's what we can do. Here's what is the option. If you throw additional bodies at it, if that works, or if we bring somebody else in to outsource this piece, or if we buy some piece of equipment, whatever, they're going to make the decision. I think they probably all know that the deadline they asked for is unrealistic, but until you can show them otherwise, they should ask for it, right? Then you got to tell them otherwise. And then they're smart people. She or he's going to make the decision of what it's going to be, like you said.
Right. I had a leader once push back. I won't say where, but she said, what I don't like about how you do it, Teresa, is that I feel like you're giving people the opportunity to take their foot off the gas pedal. And I said, because for her putting the unrealistic deadline just meant that everybody would go, and like that energy would be behind it. I said, no, I don't think they're taking their foot off the gas pedal. I think they're just going to drive where you want them to go. And it will actually be faster at the end of the day. It just looks like that right now. Like, give me this chance to show you, right? Give me this chance to show you. And I feel like that's, usually you can get leaders past that. Sometimes you can't. Like, there are those leaders, right? They're like, nope, April 1st. Nope, don't care. April 1st, don't care. April 1st, right? And those are the places that good people don't stay very long, to be honest, right? Those are the places that you lose your talent. So
yeah, because those people are working 80 hours a week and they're taking you're having to cut corners and they're not even proud of their work product. And they think there's got to be places that don't do it like this. I'm killing myself and I can't take pride. I don't want to be here anymore.
Exactly.
And you lose really talented people for sure in that situation. So, when I'm telling people about, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I'm talking about taking the foot off the gas, I always tell people when I'm teaching the class, look, here's why they're afraid that you're going to take your foot off the gas. I asked them scenario. I said, listen, so let's say the deadline was February 1st and everybody knows it's April 1st. You're not making February 1st. What if I get the manager to agree to April 1st? What is your first reaction going to be? And somebody will say, deep breath. And I said, see, you didn't have time for the deep breath. You needed to work just as hard as you were working for April 1st. You've got to keep pushing forward, right? So you can't afford to take your foot off the gas. So I think management is not as stupid as sometimes we'd like to say they are.
Right. As I've moved up in my career, I'm hoping that's correct. So.
Yeah, because now you're the person we're talking about.
I'm the person we're talking about. Right.
So ahead of a big project, what are some strategies you have for selecting and building your team? Obviously, the people that have been around love you and want to work for you, but what qualities do you look for in those team members?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of the things that happens in project management, frankly, and work in general, right, is you really become somewhat of a family. You spend a lot of time with these folks. And so I think one of the biggest things I look for is vulnerability. You know, you need somebody that's willing to come to the table and recognize that none of us know it all. We might have done projects just like this right before. We might have done something very similar people or some of the same people. Cause, you know, good project managers kind of end up in the same place sometimes. But at the end of the day, this is new. It's, you know, it's either a new leader, a new company, a new product, a new something. And so that vulnerability is key, and that ability to be open and that ability to let people in, because you're going to have that time where you need support. You're going to need, you know, you could need sort of the physical support if I need help with a task, or I don't know quite how to get over this hump. Or you could need the emotional support of, I've got a lot going on in my life. I've got a lot going on with my family, right? And I don't want to let my team down, but I don't. So it's really that vulnerability, because you cannot build a super cohesive team without it, right? If you have a lot of people coming at it, you need that to make that happen. So that's definitely one thing. I think people who are like-minded in how we get there, I'm not going to say that that's a necessity, because I sometimes like having people that just sort of stir it up, to make sure that we're all on our toes, but at the same time that we all agree that how we get there matters, right? We may not all on day one agree how that is. We might work towards that, because I like to bring people on the team. So little secret, right? I like to bring people on the team that I know completely disagree with how I do something. And I like to bring them on the team because I know that over the project, we will convert them into how to do it. And I know that typically they're going to go back and take that and seed their team with a new way of doing it. And so this is how I like to sort of expand the culture of what I do in anything, is bring the people that absolutely disagree with you and think you're crazy and get them on board over time. It will not be overnight, and it will take a lot of conversations, but get them on board so that they then can go out and be a witness, right, to that work, to that project, to that methodology, to that team, as they go out and then they do something else, right? And so those are things that I look for that I think are key. And I think when you look at core skill set, again, that dot connecting people that think project management, you know when you know that you're a project manager, right? Something. For me, it was, I was actually in an HR role, staffing a PMO role, and I walked in and I saw this massive network diagram on the wall with all the sticky notes. I'm like, what is that? And how do I do that job? Like everything, I'm like, that's just like, you've mapped my brain on the wall. Like it was the craziest thing. And so I feel like, right? My daughter and I were just talking about that. She does, graphic design and marketing and communications, but a lot of how she does it is through project management, right? And so she's like, wait, that project management thing you speak of, that thing I've heard about my entire life, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I loved it, because that's just like, she knew, like, that's how she likes to connect those dots. And so finding those people is critical, because it makes work, frankly, more fun. And it makes it, even the hardest of hard days are less hard when you have a team of people that kind of think like that, right? I also like to make sure that we're well-rounded. So as much as I love my project management people, depending on your project, it's all kinds of skill sets, right? You have to make sure that you're bringing the experts to the table, that you have the answers that you need, that people that will go dig into them when you can't get them. And so that's another critical part of making sure that you can be successful at the end of that project.
Yeah, I think that what you'll also find is those people that were reluctant to do this process, once they've seen it work, they become the biggest converts, and they become the biggest megaphones to,
yes.
It's funny, like the person who quit smoking hates all smokers now, right?
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. You get a world of advocates, right?
You do. And I think the other thing is, when we're talking about, just because it's the same, you may have done a project just like this, and it may be with a lot of the same people, but going back to what we touched on earlier, Joe might have something completely different going on in his life today than he did last time. And so it might take him longer because he has 3 other projects, or his boss is putting pressure to get this other fire put out, or maybe he just went through a divorce and he's got his kids right now. So there's all these other things that come into focus that you can't just cookie cutter this. I mean, yeah, it might be 80% the same, but there's a 20% you got to figure out. It's not the same.
Right. And as the leader, right? As the leader of that project in the moment, you got to know that stuff. You got to get to know Joe. Like
Exactly.
you've got to be open enough. You've got to make sure that Joe knows you've got his back so that Joe can tell you like, hey, here's why I'm struggling. Here's why I might not get it done. Here's the support I need to get it done. Right. And that as a leader is your number one job, is to make sure that that project team knows you have their back. That project team knows where to go. You say like, I feel like as a project leader, you spend half your time in confessional with people like just like unloading stuff. And the other half sort of like marching up the hill with them. But it's critical because if they don't feel that, you're not going to know how to course correct. You're not going to know how to shift. You're not going to know when Joe needs help. You're not going to know any of that stuff. And you can have the best laid plan, and that people side, if you are not focused on it, will trip you up just in a heartbeat.
Oh, for sure. I think that project work contains two pieces. There's the process side and the people side. And the process side, there's software that can help you with that. Microsoft Project, P6, Primavera, whatever. I haven't met a software yet that does the people side. And the people side is much more difficult to deal with. It's the key release, the secret sauce to getting things done is managing the people side well, knowing what motivates each person, what's going on in each person's life. And especially important, most of the world today, I'm not sure at Lennar, but most people, as you know from previous roles, it's a matrix organization. Mm-hmm. And as a project manager, you don't own those people on your team. So if they can't motivate them to do the right thing, you're going to be sunk. Right. So it really comes down to the people side.
Yeah, completely.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Teresa Lynch, Vice President of Field Operations at Lennar. This is such a powerful discussion, by the way, that we're going to have our first ever 3-part series. Coming up in part 2, Teresa discusses leading by example, the importance of transparency and trust, and effective communication.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.